I mentioned some time ago that I was going to do a video about our first car and the shopping that we did about that car. And the time frame was 1952. My dad had not had a car before, and so this was a new experience for him, as it was for me, because I was 12 and certainly interested in cars, but had limited knowledge. And because we didn't have a car, I didn't have that kind of personal experience that comes with having a car in the family. We walked everywhere, so in a way that was good, but it also was time consuming. So off we went to investigate cars that were available in 1952. The first car on the stop was a Renault Dauphine, and that was being sold by the Buick dealer. Now this Buick dealer was pretty far out of town, so this involved walking to the Buick dealer, which was quite an undertaking. And so we finally got there and looked around, and my dad was not impressed with the Renault Dauphine. It was a four-door sedan, and rear engine, rear drive, and it was water-cooled. And I think his objection was that it would have been better had it been air-cooled like the Volkswagen Beetle. So, and I don't think he cared for the way it was. It looked kind of flimsy to him, I believe. So we crossed that off the list. The next car on the list was the Henry J. But before we went to the Henry J, I think we stopped at a used car lot and looked at a Pontiac. And I'd say that Pontiac was maybe a 47, 48 Pontiac. And my dad was not a fan of buying a used car, so essentially he didn't believe he knew what he was getting, so that was kind of crossed off the list very quickly. Actually, we probably would have been better off with that car. And so in fact we wound up at the Kaiser Frazer dealer. Now this involved getting my aunt to drive us to this place, because this was really far out of town. The Kaiser dealers, in my experience, were not first tier. They got their franchises after, of course, all the big ones, the Chevys, the Fords, and the Plymouths, and the Dodges were all taken. So some of these guys were probably didn't have the kind of money background that an established dealer would have. And this dealer happened to be right next to a salvage yard, which I thought was kind of comical. So anyhow, we get into that Kaiser Frazer dealer and start looking around, and there is a 1952 Henry J. Vagabond. Now this was a two-door sedan, and it was the bottom of the line for Henry J. It was originally, and I didn't know this until I read the book Last Onslaught on Detroit, but these 52 Vagabonds were really re-serialized 1951s that they couldn't sell, and they evidently shipped them back to the factory at Willow Run, and then put new tags on the body with new serial numbers, and sold them as 1952 models. Now this gives new definition to the word stripped, because everything was extra. It had no trunk lid. Now there were Henry J's with trunk lids, but they were an upscale version. It had no glove box. It had no rubber sill molding as you enter the car. That would have been extra. We paid extra for that. It had no cool air vents coming into the car. That was extra, and my dad had that installed. It had no radio. After a while, we did get a radio, an aftermarket radio installed, as I remember. And you had a choice of 4 or 6 cylinder engines. And of course, my dad, being economy minded, got the 4-cylinder engine. So that essentially was a Willys engine, I believe. But it was so cheap it didn't have an oil filter. So at 30,000 miles, which was about as long as we kept the car, it needed new rings. So the Henry J's performance was, I guess you could say, adequate with the 4-cylinder. It certainly didn't set the world on fire. And we kept it for, let's see, it was 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. We kept it for 4 years. And by that time, rust was developing along the seams of the quarter panels. And I'll tell you one feature of the car that I absolutely hated, and that was the choke. It had a manual choke. When you started the car up from cold, you pulled the choke all the way out and no problem starting. However, if you had run the car for a while, stopped, and given the car a little chance to cool down, now you're coming back from your shopping and you're trying to restart the car. Now you had to figure out how far to pull that choke. If you made a mistake, if you pulled it out too far, if you didn't pull it out far enough, you would not start. If you pulled it out too far, it would flood. You'd have to wait until it cleared. It was a mess. Never in my experience have I met such a bulky choke on that car, and the travel on the choke control was considerable. So you really had to, it was almost an engineering feat to decide how far out to pull that knob. And so another aggravating feature on the Henry J was the fact it was very light in the rear end. So in winter you had to we added ballast to the back to maintain some stability on the road, especially in icy and snowy conditions. Another feature of this car was no trunk lid, which I had mentioned before, but you know, this was unbelievable. To get the back tire out, you had to drop the back of the back seat. It came down. It was very, very thinly padded too, by the way. And you had to crawl in back and unhook the spare tire, which sat vertically, roll it out, and of course the jacking paraphernalia was back there too, so you had to remove all that. And backing out of the passenger space with the jack and the jack stand and the lug wrench and trying to wheel the tire out at the same time, meanwhile while avoiding traffic, was an interesting experience. As you may know, Allstate offered this car in its catalog, and they called it the Allstate. It was manufactured by Henry J, but it was an upscale version. The upholstery was better. It had a glove box. It had an operating trunk lid. It was much better equipped than our Vagabond. So that, and by the way, Kaiser also made a Vagabond, which had an opening hatch in the back, which was quite ahead of its time, really. Kaiser had some interesting ideas about cars, but and in many ways he was ahead of his time styling-wise, because he got Darren to style it. But on the other hand, he didn't have a V8, and the lack of a V8 eventually killed the car. Henry J's were made from 51 to 54, I believe, and Kaiser cars were made into 55, and Fraser was made until 1951. That was the last Fraser. Fraser was a car guy. He knew a lot about cars. Kaiser was an aluminum guy, guy who built built dams, and he built Liberty ships, I guess, and he was a builder, but he didn't know a thing about cars, so it was an unholy union. So at any rate, that was my experience with the Henry J. I must say I learned how to drive in that car. Because it was manual shift, I learned right away how to use manual shift and how to drive a manual shift car. My mom learned how to drive on that car, and my dad, of course, he honed his driving skills on that car. Our next car was a used Studebaker, which is another story. So if you're interested in hearing my experiences with the Studebaker, I'll save that for the next my next blog here. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.